Welcome back to the show. Look at Dana and I looking so good.
Rather dapper. Yeah. We look like we're going to
I
a
feel like,
formal or something.
and really, I think in general, it's probably because like Dana really does come to each episode just with a very similar style because Dana, like that's Dana's formula.
Right, exactly.
Me, on the other hand, depending on what's happened in the morning, I could look pretty rough. Or I could have had 10 extra minutes and look like, ooh, I'm going to look like I got it together today.
Okay.
So it's really not Dana, actually.
Yeah.
Dana's the consistent steady.
There you go.
Gwen, on the other hand, is the variable, the changing variable in the equation.
Yeah. My life used to be like that. And then I'm like, even before I knew I was autistic, I'm like, I went through my vest period where I was wearing like a shirt and a vest when I was in school and like sweatshirts. And now it's like the wrinkle-free shirt and a sweater. It's pretty easy. I just have to figure out the color I feel like. Today I felt like black and white because the news is depressing. So I'm wearing black and white.
That's right. But I do feel like this is probably a good segue into our topic today, which really, and I'll look at it maybe from a higher kind of like a drone's eye view, which is we've been talking a lot about goodness of fit for clients and therapists, right? Is that a goodness of fit where therapists might go wrong and stuff? But when therapists do not get themselves, are aware of themselves, know how to manage themselves in the context of the work. Yeah. We got some flags.
Yeah, like the red flags for a therapist. Focus on that end of it. Teaching in a program where we're training burgeoning psychologists, right?
Yeah.
We talk a lot about some of those things and really having to be in touch with limitations you might have. But I think it's for working with neurodivergent clients, I think it can be, fertile ground for mistakes, right? Oh, frankly, I have so many stories of people that have found me that have said, this is what another therapist said, or this is what another therapist did. And it's usually, the proverbial, you can't be autistic because you make too much eye contact or you have too many friends or, just sort of that basic, I don't know what autism looks like. But then it's also things like that you and I would expect to see from ethical therapists where they're not being ethical. Like you had mentioned before we went on the air, a therapist, someone complaining because they knew about a therapist who they could reach whenever they wanted to, like through a cell phone or text,
phone, anytime, on the weekends, at night. You guys, that's not okay.
Group practices that do like on call so that someone's available for emergencies. And then there are practices like I'm one person. I tell my clients when we're starting, I'm not set up to handle 24-hour emergencies. And if you're feeling like you're going to be hurt or hurt yourself or something like that, you need to call 911 because that's not something I equipped to manage. So someone's like available all the time. And why do we say this? Therapy, we talk a lot about the therapeutic container and having those limits and boundaries for therapy. It's so much about the holding environment, right? And it's not being able to reach someone at some particular point in time is sort of about that boundary, knowing where those limits are. If you expand that, it can actually make clients really anxious, right? And we'll talk about, certain populations you're really supposed to not expand the container with. But it can, if it's predictable and it's always on the same day and you're starting and stopping at the same time and the permutations of how you can get a hold of each other are consistent, that would be like consistent parenting, right? And if you start to change that, there's a reason why legal code in every state and our ethics code says so much about, there's an entire section just on boundaries in terms of not letting those boundaries bleed. Like you're not supposed to go out for coffee with you're just not supposed to socialize. that said, it's supposed to be more of a one-way flow of information. And think about it. If you have a friend that you're disclosing things to, and then they're disclosing things, and you're disclosing things, and they're disclosing things, like, you sort of get to those deeper levels of friendship. Therapists are not doing that so that you can be held in that way. And that's sort of what a healthy parent is supposed to do. A healthy parent isn't supposed to be telling you all kinds of things about trouble in their relationships and, parentifying a kid. But the idea is it's one-way flow so that you're feeling seen, and it's therapy. It's like getting treatment at the doctor. You don't, sit down and have a meal together with your doctor and then have a pap smear. It would be weird, right? Trying to think of something that would really, because you could have a dinner with your doctor and then have a blood test. It's like, well, whatever. It had to be something weird, right? Yeah. So those kinds of boundaries are not prohibited by law, but ours actually is. And so we train our students, and I always learned that even if a client says you did this boundary violation, and it wasn't something like you created, the state and the court and everything else, you have the onus of that. You have to prove that you haven't done it. So nothing's on the client. And the idea is they are seen as this vulnerable population because we're treating them, right? So it takes on so much more importance for us to have those limits and those boundaries so that person feels consistently held. So when people aren't doing that, if you have a therapist who's like, oh yeah, call me anytime, or oh, let's go out for coffee, or we're going to this movie, you want to come? And those are serious boundary violations that person could lose their license for, even at the master's level, but at the doctoral level, you really have it pounded into you because they have you for so many more years in school to scare you hard, right? So some of those boundary things can be red flags. And then it can take on different forms, like the therapist self-disclosing too much or telling you too much about themselves, or sharing a bunch of things about their own life that you're like, oh, wait a minute. Now you're all of a sudden, you're like having to take care of them. So that flow of information sort of modifies, and it changes the dynamic. It's not something you can lean into fully now. Like you might feel like you have to take care of them. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Well, and let's be clear, your therapist is not your friend.
Right.
You don't pay for friends. Okay. Yeah. Well, I hope you don't.
Well, maybe.
Okay. So the therapeutic relationship is unlike any other. Mm-hmm. Okay. It is not a friendship. It is a place of unconditional positive regard. Well, hopefully, on some level, right? Yeah. Where the focus of the time is in service of the client.
Right.
So, sometimes therapists, like if I think about when I make a choice to disclose. Yeah. So that's a choice, not because I'm, having a grand old time, Yeah. It's because it's trying to normalize or offer that what you're struggling with, or it's hard. Like this is hard. Right, even someone like for me as a parent, I'll share with other parents, like, look, I'm a parent of a teen myself, and I make these mistakes all the time because they are hard, right? Like, and so, but and that's why even in a party when, like I hate disclosing that I'm a psychologist at a party. I know. It's like, oh, please don't ask me what I do. I mean, at this point, I think I just want to flat out lie. But, it's like, oh no, you have a problem. You're psychoanalyzing me, and it's like, what? Like, it's such a specific mindset and muscle, and like, no, of course not.
But the stereotype is there, right? Because there's, most of the representations of therapists in the movies and on TV are terrible. I mean, they're continually. Yeah. I actually like the series that was on last year. I think they're doing another one. I want to say it was called Shrinked. I think
Shrinking.
Oh,
I couldn't even get past the first episode because he's so unethical.
Show is just wrought with boundary violations, and they do.
If you guys want to see boundary violations, watch that show.
Yeah. The older therapist finally does confront the guy, and he says, "You're being boundaryless," and that's the way we're sort of portrayed. So I think sometimes people think, "Oh, that's sort of how it's supposed to be." No, those should be red flags, right, to you.
Yeah.
What is ethical behavior? So boundaries around that. Things like if your therapist says something like, oh, don't worry that you can't pay for the session. I'll just bill your insurance for an extra session like that you
Oh
haven't.
boy. Well, that's fraud,
That's
people. It's
fraud.
just heads
I
up.
mean,
It's fraud.
I've heard so many stories, mostly through students of things that
Yeah.
therapists have done. Um, Boundaries then become kind of sticky if you live in a situation where you might all of a sudden you're sitting there talking to someone, you're like, I think I might know that person, right?
Mm.
If you're in a big city like we are, you can refer out. I think I shared this on a different podcast years and years and years ago. I had a client who met someone during Pride weekend, which was great because a lot of the therapy was about wanting to meet someone. And then, of course, it ended up being that it was a student of mine where I taught. And I'm like, ah. So this was a client I'd seen for a long time. It was a student, obviously, I had for a long time. So navigating that was a little bit sticky. But I could see where therapists would be like, oh, yeah, no problem. Let's all, ugh. I keep saying the go out for coffee thing because I cannot tell you how many times I've heard stories where people's therapists have taken them out for coffee. And then I go, well, it's only coffee. We just had our session in the coffee house. Then we get into this confidentiality problem. So even if people can't hear you, now you're out in public with this person. If they know that's a therapist and you're sitting there with them, they'd be like, well, what's going on there? So
Yeah.
that's another red flag for therapy if your client isn't respectful of your privacy and your confidentiality, which is like the other super main tenet that we learn in therapy. That's our responsibility to make sure yours is kept confidential, that people don't
Yeah.
have access to that, right?
Yeah.
So those can be sorts of red flags. If your therapist feels like they don't kind of have it together, like they're canceling on you all the time or last minute or rescheduling, or the billing is sort of messed up. I mean, if they're just sort of scattered and not doing things, and then you're having to kind of like, those sorts of things I think are red flags for therapists. And it's unique to therapy because oftentimes therapists don't have staff to do those things for them like medical doctors do, unless it's a larger practice. But it also sort of is speaking to the capacity of that therapist, that they're so scattered and barely functioning that they can't hold you. And that's
Yeah.
not good. And I'm not trying to disparage someone who's going through their own stuff. I mean, things happen. But a lot of doing therapy is to have that, what my therapist years ago used to call like ego strength, meaning I know I can check or set aside my stuff for this period of time because I need to, versus not feeling like you can do that, like you're out of control in that way. I've had clients tell me that their therapist cried with them, and not like crying
Mhm.
because they went through something hard, but like their own stuff crying,
Oh.
like coming into the therapy crying. Like, oh, I'm so
Mm.
sorry, I lost this
Oh.
relative. And then they're crying through the whole session and they're, that they felt like they had to caretake the therapist. And I was like,
Oh no. That's a good time to cancel the session.
it's a good time to cancel the session. Exactly. The week my brother-in-law died suddenly, I canceled the following
Yeah.
Monday. Right away. I'm
Yeah.
like, I know I'm not going to be in a good place.
I'm not
And
available. Like
I'm
I'm
not, and I
not
just, yeah,
my
yeah,
instrument is not available.
exactly.
Dina, we're talking and it's interesting because there are just in the nature of the work that I do, I tend to be in the community with my clients.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
there's a conversation about disclosure and confidentiality and risks.
Yeah.
And that we've talked about if the benefits, what are the benefits and what are the risks?
Mm-hmm.
And that if, and so I'm thinking about a few of my clients that have not been able to leave their homes because of COVID. And I'm like, we gonna get some sun and take a walk.
Oh, yeah.
And here's why.
Yeah, when you're working
Are
with
you
younger
okay with
kids,
this? Here are the potential downfalls of this. Here, I do believe though that is in the grand scheme of things, something to help with getting this momentum started for you or getting, and that, and so it's interesting because,
that's
as
what makes
we're
it
talking,
sort of messy and difficult, right? Because it's not
it's
one size fits
it
all.
is nuanced.
There can be times when that's appropriate. Yeah.
And it's like, and I'm not trying to make excuses for myself because our conversation does have me reflecting and why there are, I don't do this all the time, but there are certain individuals that certain clients for me that I'm like, this is like kind of significant. Like this
And you
is
explain to them, like,
instrumental.
we be out in public.
Yeah.
Are you okay with this? And
Yes. Yep. That kind of stuff. So, that's interesting because I think this maybe brings up another layer, which is working with neurodivergence.
Yes. Yeah.
And that so often a traditional, let's say, exposure therapy or whatever, like is not appropriate. Like in the grand scheme of things, you're like, wow, as a therapist, I've learned that CBT is the protocol for X.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, but not appropriate for this client.
Right.
With similar struggles, but that brain is not wired for this.
Yeah.
Right.
And this is a really interesting thing is just as you're talking and becoming aware of this 5 years ago or more, maybe 3 years ago or more, you would get people going into therapy and they'd say, oh yeah, of course I can work with an autistic. And even when it was called Asperger's for adults, oh yeah, I can work with that. What I'm seeing now is, and maybe it's just a function of therapists becoming more familiar with the fact that it's outside their competence. Not that they're getting the competence, but it's outside their competence. Because I'm having people have a harder and harder time where they'll reach somebody and say, "I need adult therapy for autism," and the therapist will say, "Oh, I'm not versed in that," and then they can't find anybody at all. Yeah. Which I'm not sure it's what's worse, getting with someone who says, oh yeah, I can work with that, and they don't know what they're doing. Or someone who says, I can't work with that because I don't know that. But yeah, let's say you're going in and you don't know you're autistic yet, or you're wondering about it. The vast majority, and granted, my sample is skewed because people are coming to me having been through this already, but I've had so many people say that a therapist asked a few questions and says, no, you're not autistic. And that, we've talked about that in here. That's just not competent in knowing what the scoop is with all the permutations of that. Right. But yeah, that can be someone doing a therapy that isn't suited for that sort of client, not knowing what they're doing. And it sort of is like a little kid wielding their father's gun. It can really cause damage.
Yeah. I mean, even if it's okay, like, and I don't think Dana and I are saying this is intentional. Like, this is unintentional. And, I don't believe, for the most part, I don't believe people wake up in the morning and like, what? Who can I screw over today? Right. Like, I really don't believe that. And that, by and large, I mean, I think therapists go into the work because they want to help people, know? And so the thing though, is like, when you don't know what your own competence is, and I will just say to everybody, as psychologists, we need to be very clear about what our competence, where our competence lies, and that there is a protocol ethically for how to obtain competence if you are going to start treating or supporting, intervening with something outside of your wheelhouse.
Yeah. And that you've had training in before. Yeah.
And there's so many different types of psychology, so many different types of the way to practice that, at some point in time, you do need to continue to train and continue to, increase your skills.
Right.
But when the therapists themselves, so we usually talk about self-awareness for you, right?
Yeah.
For the client, for the person, and that unlocks your life for yourself, because when you know about yourself and then you know how to ask for that support or that help, right? Like that's positive.
Yeah.
And that's productive. Therapists also have to know themselves, because there are certain populations of people and diagnoses that I am not a good fit for.
Yeah, exactly.
And I have learned this the hard way. But I'm not fit for it. And it's also why I form like, maybe apart from like helping a client generalize or get into the community when we're very stuck, that's probably an exception. But I will say all in all, like, I don't text. You can email me or call me. And those will be returned to you between 9 and 5 from Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
And I'm not emailing you after those times. And I'm not picking up a call outside of those times.
Yeah, and that's a therapist self-care, right? When someone is boundless with themselves and want to do it, be available anytime, that's not good for them either. They'll burn out.
And then we're useless, by the way. Then we're not only useless to that client, we're useless to all our clients.
Yeah, right.
And it's just not fair. And so I think, you know, the therapist really does, and I really feel like therapy, like red flags are something that are usually reflective of the therapist.
Right, exactly. Surprisingly enough. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah. And if you don't find a good fit with a therapist, or it takes a few, I think that's normal.
Yeah, that, like I said, that national average, I think, is 3 to 5 therapists.
Right.
I gave my little dog a bone, and now
get her.
Yeah, come here. You want to say hi? No, we'll show her in the next podcast.
We'll show her in the next. So, you know, so for those of you out there, I mean, I think for Dana and I, you know, it's like talking about things that and processing. It's like, oh, this is Dana and I processing, you know, but our own feelings about being therapists.
Yeah, if you're getting the heebie-jeebies and you're feeling like this isn't a good fit, it's okay to not continue. I guess or bring it up with them and say, this is how I'm feeling, and see how they handle that. Right?
Yes. Yeah. Your therapist should be able to take constructive feedback.
Absolutely. You know, I've had clients where we've worked together for, you know, a month or so, and they have said, I don't know if this is a good fit. And I don't take it personally. And I just say, this needs to be for you. Absolutely. Thank you for telling me. What can I do to, you know, help you segue? It's just, you don't get along with everybody. So therapists don't get along with everybody. Just personality wise, it's okay.
Yep. And remember that in previous episodes for us, the biggest, most significant factor of therapeutic effectiveness is relationship.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
So if that's not landed and that doesn't feel steady and strong and reliable and contained, I think that, like, thematically, if it doesn't feel that way, it's not about you.
Could just be
these
the
are probably things.
Could be red flags about the therapist.
Could be red flags.
Ooh, the other thing you can do that a lot of people don't realize is, depending on what state you're in, you can Google, you can look up their license. Either they'll have their license number on the stuff they're giving you, but you can look them up and you can see if there's been any ethical complaints against them that were founded. And so that's something you can do as well if you want to look that up and you kind of get into heebie-jeebies. Yeah. And it could just be the personality fit isn't good, and that's okay.
Yeah. And that's totally okay. And but I think we're trying to empower you as an audience to be like, wait, that doesn't feel good to me. I don't like that. I've brought this up. Well, they got really defensive. Whatever. Switch. Like, you know, I see harm being done when clients don't switch and are like, well, they're the expert and I'm the broken one. So obviously it's me.
That's like gaslighting. Yeah.
And that's self-gaslighting.
You're broken.
That's a gas mask. It's gas masking yourself. That's what we're going to call it. Oh, put that on a shirt. Don't gas mask.
Don't gas mask yourself.
Stop gas masking.
No, stop it.
So, okay. So what's okay, here's our merch. We've got JOMO, the joy of missing out. We've got Nunya, which, by the way, you know who you are, but in another episode, you helped us with another one. Nacho business.
Nacho business. Yeah.
Love. Cracked up. You're the best. You know who you are. Thank you. And now it's like gas masking. Literally yourself.
Yeah, you can do it to yourself.
Put the gas mask on, and you're just doing it to yourself. Don't stop doing that. Take it off.
Exactly.
We're so smart.
We are. Yeah. We're solving the world's problems, really.
We really are. We do that 20 minutes at a time every week.
That's right.
And for the now 11 of you that actually
that are,
are in our audience, thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
for indulging Dana and I.
Yeah.
Let's just do all the red flags for therapists. Thank you for being there for us.
Yeah. Yeah. There. Oh, yeah. I'm so appreciate you understanding me. I can't even fake it. I can't. It just comes out as bad acting. It's just so I can't do it. Can't do it. If I had to do like process acting that way, like really believing it, I don't think I could do it.
I know. Okay.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. We will catch you in the next episode. Be good to you and don't gas mask yourself.
Don't
Bye.
gas
See you later.
yourself. Bye.